All right, Paige, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you all for your time today. I'm certainly thrilled and delighted to be here to talk a little bit about the keys to successfully driving change. And so I lead a company called CorpU, and we focus on the people side of business transformation, helping companies to drive strategy and build capability, strengthen leadership, and build collaboration across teams around the world. So that's a little bit about my background, and I'd like to talk a little bit as we go about the pace of change is accelerating. So some of the external thoughts that are happening, some of the external environment, the time to $1 billion valuation. So in typical Fortune 500 company in the past, it was a 20-year journey, and today you see it in a matter of months or just a few years, and that's happening at an increasing pace. So the changes in the external environment are coming at you at an ever faster way. And if you look at the lifespan of a large organization, for example, the S&P 500, so whereas the lifespan used to be 60 years that a company would live on the S&P 500, today that's 20 and shrinking. And there's no reason to believe that the pace of change will slow down for companies, their lifespans, or new disruptive innovations that might come after your company and get there very quick. What we see is that the pace of change has finally accelerated past our ability to keep up with the pace of change. The learning curve has gone faster. Somebody who studies that is Gary Hamel from the London Business School and Harvard Business School. He teaches at both. And Gary firmly believes and has produced some pretty good research that would say that we need a complete momentum building management revolution to change everything, because most of what we do on the people side of management, although we've automated with ERP and CRM and HCM, the people side of management still involves a bunch of people sitting around and going to meetings and talking and managing some quality circles, and a lot of the assembly line and factory processes are things that were the founders of modern management that were invented before the end of the Civil War. So if we see how we're doing today, McKinsey published a study that just this year, 2017, that said strategies fall short of their desired results 70% of the time, and this hasn't changed in 30 years. So we see that over decades, that pace of change continues to relentlessly accelerate, and as a result, despite everybody trying everything they can imagine, strategies, people don't get to the final destination a supermajority of the time. And we know that organizations are more complex now. So the average individual contributor has to work with 10 people who don't report to them to get their job done. And so a lot of the reasons for this have been the delayering of organizations. As organizations drive efficiency gains, they take out layers of management. And as a result, you have these complex matrix organization structures where you have to collaborate with people to get work done while you're serving multiple masters. The problem with that is, as you work with those 10 people, there's a study published in Harvard Business Review on the secrets to successful strategy execution that said that 7 out of 10 people cannot name their company's strategy, even with the correct answers printed in front of them. So they would print a list of a number of wrong strategies plus the right strategy and give people a test and say which one is your company's. And this is where 7 out of 10 got that wrong. So as we keep going, we look at The Economist did a pretty good survey of executives, and they found that most felt good, a majority, about formulating strategy, but a supermajority did not feel good about executing strategy. So where does that leave us? And I'll just sort of summarize the literature and the research with this sort of final piece of information. And it basically says that, and a pretty large study was done here, but supermajority say that their strategy is not well understood, that people don't connect it to business measures. And even if it was understood and connected to business measures, a supermajority of them say, we don't even have the capabilities required to execute the strategy. So when you define a strategy to get to a desired future state, there are things you have to do to put in place the plans to make sure it's understood, to make sure it's translated and linked to business, and to make sure that you have a system to build those capabilities. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So why are we stuck? I'll offer 4 hypotheses today. for why we see the people side of business transformation or business change not getting there. The first is this idea that we overemphasize big data, but we don't look at the cultural side of change, the thick descriptive data, what anthropologists and social scientists call thick descriptive data. And so by not looking at the people side, looking into their hearts and minds, what do they believe? What do they understand? How do they feel? What are their emotions? Are they excited? Or are they scared? Are they leaning in or leaning out? By not looking at both the logical side of the organization with big data and combining it with thick descriptive data, it leaves us overemphasizing one over the other. The next is an overfocus on inputs rather than outputs. So if you read some literature on change management, you'll often see things like, and I'll call these inputs, develop a compelling vision for the future, develop a guiding coalition, develop a communications plan, and communicate. So this is what we see, and those are inputs. We're measuring the wrong things. Those are things that you can put on a checklist and go do, but they don't tell us anything about how people perceive any of that. So there's an over-focus on those inputs, and we would argue that there's some outputs that need to be focused on. And then the next is overload, and that is sensory overload and system overload. So the deck is stacked against us today to try to stay focused. If we look at the literature on new media and digital media and social media, what we know is that more and more things are coming at us faster and faster all day. We're becoming way more distracted than ever. The attention spans are getting shallower. There are articles like Is Google Making Us Stupid that are making their way across the social sciences. The idea is that we're hitting a sensory overload, and it's driven by several billion smartphones that we all carry a smartphone in our pocket now. So we essentially have a supercomputer that was about $1 trillion worth of technology 60 years ago, sits in our pocket today for a couple $100. And the next would be system overload, which is there's just so many initiatives and so many strategies. And so what we see from people is it's very difficult between the sensory overload and system overload with the number of meetings and emails and communications that it's pretty hard to keep a large group of people focused on and on task. And then finally, overbuilt business structures. A lot of organizations have been built on a hierarchical model. And the hierarchical model is fine. It works well with big data. And we can structure and organize and pay and reward and hire and fire and build all of these things around that structure. But that structure is overbuilt on one side, whereas there's the concept of harnessing collective intelligence. And we believe there are new structures that you can build to actually harness the collective intelligence of the enterprise and use that to your advantage to win in the marketplace. And so what are the keys to those things? So as we look about those sort of 4 hypotheses, I want to talk about the 4 keys to change management next year. And these are things that you need to think about. Do we have a system or a process to do this? Are we doing this? And these are the keys to driving success. The first is engaging your people in a conversation. So you'll be shocked and you'll be amazed that when you engage people in conversation about your new initiatives or strategies for next year, what we see over and over and over, and this is with tens of thousands of leaders in large organizations, is that one, they're shocked. The number one thing we see is people say, I'm just excited that you asked my opinion. No one's ever done that before. But what's neat about it is if we can engage people in a conversation and we can keep track of that conversation, it's generating massive amounts of thick descriptive data. So if you think about running a town hall meeting and getting 2 or 3 questions, imagine that as compared to uploading your strategy onto a server and asking everybody to engage in a big conversation. Use some of the content, the videos and the readings. The content is a lens through which they talk about the business. And imagine getting thousands or tens of thousands of conversations. And now you have that, you can start to analyze that thick descriptive data and start to get into the culture and the stories and the beliefs and the habits and find out these are the things that make the difference between winning and losing when you're executing your change. next year. So the second one is measure the human side of change. So again, moving from inputs to outputs, what do those outputs look like? Understanding, do they understand it? Do they get it? And once they get it, do they buy in? Do they believe that this was the right strategy? And so you would be shocked to find out that many people don't believe in the strategy in their company. Therefore, their commitment wanes. Can we measure commitment? How about sentiment? Are they positive or negative? What type of language are they using? How are they communicating? How about fear and inspiration? So you can measure those things when you look at thick descriptive data as a new data to complement your big data to get a more left brain, right brain, comprehensive picture of organizational intelligence. The third is you have to shape the environment for focus. So we know people are distracted, but there's a lot of power that can be gleaned if you have a collective convening of people while they're on the strategic journey. And you make your course corrections by creating the time to get people together. And so you do this at a steady rate. There's this pulse check idea or some way to connect people together, but it has to happen monthly or quarterly. But there has to be some type of pulse check and conversation that we have this collective convening, having a conversation. And what are we doing in that collective convening and conversation? We're course correcting. So people say that when they launch a rocket to the moon, it's off course 99% of the time. And it's constantly using external data to make mid-course corrections to get the rocket to land on the moon. I would suggest that that is perfectly analogous to what we need to do to drive successful change. And what you need to think about in your organization is there's no such thing as a straight line from the current state to the future state. That isn't going to happen. But nothing can beat engaging your people in different business units, in different divisions of the business, different age groups, including baby boomers and millennials, and people with different hire dates, those that have been there less than 5 years and maybe over 15. So we're comparing a lot of diversity of thought. And by creating those purposeful interventions and driving that conversation, not only do you get more data, you also get more buy-in, you get more clarity, you get more commitment. Those are things that come along for free in the culture when you engage people in dialogue. And the last is create purposeful collaboration. And this is the idea of, are you, in addition to the hierarchy, finding ways to harness the collective intelligence that exists? So we see things like idea tournaments or prediction markets. Can we predict with accuracy by the crowd what's the prediction on our ability to get to the destination? And if we identify that predictions are falling low on one of the strategic pillars that we're working towards to get to the destination, maybe we have an idea tournament or we do a problem swarming session. So these are things that you do to get people to come together to prescribe the right answer to the best way forward when you're coming out to improve your predictive odds of success. So these are the basics, the keys. And what that looks like, if we engage people in that conversation and we get all that, we can actually create the equivalent of an organizational X-ray through natural language processing and sentiment analysis. Once we've engaged them into that structured dialogue, it's like giving the leader the ability to see into the hearts and minds of people. You can see how they feel. Are they bought in? Are they skeptical? Are they excited? And you can start to see it across divisions, across business units, across levels, even across tenure in the organization. And the idea behind GPS is actually, again, harnessing that collective intelligence using data. So as you have that data, you can start to predict and prescribe. How should we go forward given the barrier that we just identified that is holding us back? Well, we can get some turn-by-turn guidance if we harness that collective intelligence and we look at these problems, surface them, and get people together into that environment. And we use all of that to predict and prescribe. And so imagine having a crystal ball that allowed you to see into the future. But these are all things that you can do today. They're all things that are engaging your people in structured dialogue to help the organization think about change management, change execution, strategy execution, but move from an analog model that was designed 50 years ago to one that's digital, from one that is monologue-based to one that is dialogue-based. And as you see on this screen, this is data, but moving from one where we We guess at the gut reaction after a town hall meeting or a communication or a newsletter, and we actually have a data-driven approach to seeing into whether people are getting it and buying in, and whether the movement is happening in the culture, in the people. And that's what we think of as managing the people side of business transformation and building a system that you can use to help you drive that people side. And so if we see management has a plan on the left side of this particular slide, and on the far right, we're effectively executing the plan, these are the 6 barriers that you need to remove. And there are, again, many ways for you to think about how to do this, but this we have studied all of the literature and have done lots and lots of projects to come up with and synthesize. Barrier 1, do people know where we're going and why we're going there and how we plan to get there? That's the first and biggest barrier. Almost every company I have ever worked with does not pass the test of barrier 1. Every piece of research I have seen in the academic world would point to barrier 1 as the #1 overwhelming barrier. And I'll go back to people with overfocus and sensory overload. More meetings and more communications and more email doesn't fix this. Barrier 2, buy-in. So once they do get it, again, should we care? Does this matter? And then barrier number 3, if I bought in, like, do I even know what levers to pull? Barrier 4, do I have the capability to do this? Number 5, do I have the freedom? Am I empowered to go execute? And number 6, how am I motivated? What does the recognition and reward system look like? What's in it for me? And how does that work for me? And it's a simple way to think about what's different in the way we see the world. And this is rooted in the sociocultural theory of how people and organizations learn. Almost all of the way we think of learning today is done on the left side of this 2x2 grid. So if somebody wants to learn something, they may do a web search. 9 times out of 10, that's how they're going to learn. And if the company has content, they typically make it available in the top left quadrant, and you connect people to content. But what we've learned is that connecting people to content can be tough, because we're in an ocean. People are drowning in an ocean of content. So connecting them to content can be flat and boring and like drowning. But if we go to the right side, connecting people to people is human. So if we can think of ways to go to connect people to people, and then use content as a lens through which you engage in a conversation about the business, we believe that's the right way. And there are ways to do that formal, where you have a guided pace cohort of people. So there's an expert guide, there's a pace, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And there's a group of people. You have to do this with 20 or 30 or 200 or 300 or 3,000 people, but they go on that journey together. And that's the top right quadrant. And the community of practice is a virtual learning areas where the people that are practicing to drive that change initiative go to share ideas, share best practices, share early wins. But that's a networked model of the firm. And these are difficult to build because everybody's built websites for connecting people to content. Most learning is built to connect people to content, and it's not about connecting people to people. And we believe strongly that connecting people to people is first and foremost. And a sociocultural theory will explain the answers to how we will ultimately create successful organizations in the 21st century. It's going to be about people, and it's going to be about connecting people in dialogue. And dialogue is not a new concept. Socrates talked about it nearly 2,500 years ago with the Socratic dialogue and methods. And Peter Senge popularized it again in the 90s when he wrote the book, the best-selling book, The Fifth Discipline, The Art and Science of the Learning Organization. And what we've done is focused on what would a 21st century model of dialogue bring us? Because here's what we know. It is through dialogue that we get groups of people to go from vision to shared vision. It's through dialogue. So that's what has to happen. Dialogue is the way to shared vision. It could be shared vision about the future state, where we're going. It could be shared vision about problems that need to be solved, root causes. It could be shared visions about things we should be doing better as an organization. The key is that to get from vision to shared vision, we need dialogue. What happens when you engage people in dialogue? There is scientific research that says people become more clear, they become more enthusiastic, and they become more committed. And further, if you continue to reinforce the dialogue as you stay focused on achieving a goal for the business, a large goal with a large group of people, you get increased clarity, enthusiasm, and commitment, and it rubs off on others. So you start to build momentum. So if you read a book on change management and you get your guiding coalition, you get your great vision, you hold some meetings, you've got to get the clarity and the enthusiasm, and you've got to get it to rub off on others. You've got to get wins to share. And so I would argue that through dialogue, that is the best way to achieve all of those things. And so we know that employee engagement is at an all-time low since Gallup started measuring it over the last several decades. And people that engage people in strategy activation or engage in dialogue, you actually get a free lift on employee engagement without trying. So, which is just another thought, which is the harder you try to invest to improve employee engagement, it seems the worse employee engagement gets. So trying to go after that directly might be the wrong thing. But what we've seen is data. If you engage people in the strategy or the important initiatives in the business and ask them to engage in dialogue, what do you think? What do you think about it? Are you excited about it? Scared? What obstacles do you think would get in our way? How would your department or your part of the business do this versus other parts of the business? How do you see those connections forming? And if you ask people that, they become more engaged in the business. So you get that for free. So dialogue is key to getting them there. And this is ultimately moving from monologue to dialogue is really about summarizing this, moving from town hall meetings and emails and newsletters and posters and standard communication techniques. They're all still good. So I'm not advocating that you don't continue. Those things are great. But engaging in dialogue with networks and then analyzing that dialogue deeply to see how we're doing and start to think about this thick descriptive data and think about the heart and soul of your organization. Match that with big data, where big data, like you'd get out of an Achieve It. So you have Achieve It as a strategy execution platform, and it's a wonderful place to put your goals and objectives, your OKRs, to track initiatives, to drive those into the organization. But what we see is that if you can complement that with a system that engages people in dialogue and connects them together in purpose-built groups in networks, you connect them to what do they do when you connect them in these purpose-built groups. You connect them, they help solve complex problems, generate and spread ideas. They teach and learn from each other and from experts both inside and outside the company. They capture and amplify new knowledge. So the key to dialogue, what's so beautiful about it is it's generative, meaning new knowledge is generated in the space. When people engage in dialogue and a conversation about the business, they're creating whole new knowledge. All kinds of new ideas and knowledge are firing, and they can be amplified across the network quickly, particularly new ways to win in a competitive situation. If a competitor's taking some of your business and a sales force, a person has a new win, you can share that best practice quickly and watch that go. And the other thing is you can harness the collective genius by running sort of prediction markets and let people vote and predict what are the odds of strategy success, and you can use that to prescribe things like what's the best way forward on this. Let's run an idea tournament, pressure test it by the crowd, and go from 100 ideas to 50 to 25 to 10 to 5. Let's get it down to the top 3, and then make a decision about what we're going to do to move forward. But that's how you harness the collective genius of the people. And if I just put that, sort of bring this all together and in a use case, this is one where we work with a life sciences company to help them on their 4 stages of strategy, their 4 phases from formulating, activating, tracking, and iterating. And this is a life sciences firm. And what's so interesting about this is that we've been managing the people side, engaging people to think big and mobilize the masses. And Achieve It does the project tracking, the initiatives, the goals, and measurement systems. And it's a really nice example of an organization that has success. And this is an article that from Supply Chain World that came out in the last couple weeks that showed an example of Agilent Technologies in Silicon Valley using strategy activation to engage 3,000 employees and cut down the activation from 6 to 9 months to a matter of days to engage everybody to access all that information. And finally, this is my last slide, and we'll go on to some questions and dialogue. Just examples of what this looks like. So what does it mean to have an idea tournament? So here's a quote from a vice president at Dow. 87 million in new ideas, and what was more powerful to Dow was that they were able to attract a new era of young and bright talent who were excited to be part of and to be invited into innovation tournaments and to bring their ideas to the table. At Coca-Cola, it was about tightening the supply chain around the world in order to double the size of the business, make sure they had access to fresh water, and so on. And so they did a strategy activation project. They measured their payback at 175 million. These are Coca-Cola's reported numbers, not mine, just like Johnson & Johnson. So these are their numbers. And ultimately, they're using strategy activation to create the J&J operating system as the one way, the J&J way, that they will operate all factories around the world. But the key to all of these successes are harnessing collective genius, engaging people in structured dialogue, and then doing deep analytics on that dialogue. That's the key.